Hitler and his four generals. The stormy years of World War II. Four figures stand out in the waves of history. They each served as key generals and advisors to Adolf Hitler, but played very different roles in the shadow of war. Their inner thoughts and dynamic relationships framed the rise and fall of Nazi Germany in World War II, and the subtle connections between them and Hitler still deeply fascinate history buffs today. In the following pages, we will take you into their world and explore their humanity through the smoke and dust of history. 1. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein. What were the origins of Erich von Manstein, a veteran of the military world, before he became the most recognized tactician on the Eastern Front of World War II? Like all great personal histories, his story begins as a passionate teenager. During that period, the splendor of the German Empire was reflected in every inch of the land, inspiring the young Manstein to create his own glory. During his formative years, his father was his character builder, influencing his thoughts and emotions. Under his father's guidance, Manstein was introduced to military studies and was deeply influenced by his father's strict discipline and passion for the military life, thus nurturing his military talent. The young Manstein chose to start his military career by joining the Royal Military Academy. His determination and enthusiasm enabled him to display unique leadership skills at the school. His keenness in judging problems and sniffing out battle situations made him stand out in the process. When World War I broke out, Manstein did not hesitate to head to the front lines. The brutality and bloodshed of the war far exceeded his imagination. With unique strategies and decisive decisions, he won sustained victories. As a result, he was highly regarded by his peers and continued to elevate his status in the army. Although it was a time of smoke and blood, Manstein saw in it the value and meaning of being a soldier. Thus began the transformation of a passionate teenager into a brilliant military man whose military career was forged and rose through battle after battle. In 1935, he was promoted to the rank of General of Infantry for his contributions to the training and organization of the re-equipped and modernized German Army. In 1940, he was promoted to the rank of Field Marshal, largely due to his outstanding performance in the early stages of World War II, particularly in the Battle of France. With the outbreak of World War II, the world was redivided. In the eastern part of Europe, Manstein began his important career as a master of strategy and tactics. The ingenuity he displayed at the beginning of the war was a great success for the German army. In the fall of 1941, Kiev was covered with armies in Manstein's hands, and the air was filled with the scent of battle and smoke. It was a long-planned battle, planned and guided by the German army's #1 tactician, Ferdinand Skyner von Manstein, and is now widely regarded as one of the most tactically golden battles of World War II. Manstein's symbolic strategy was evident in this battle. He constantly maneuvered his troops to lead the Soviets deeper into German positions, then cut their logistical lines at a critical moment and completely encircled them. This tactic, known as encirclement warfare, was used to great effect by Manstein. The Soviet army was in a difficult position in this battle. They were surrounded by about 600,000 soldiers and were disorganized, with no unified chain of command. After struggling for days, most of the soldiers were captured and only a small number managed to escape. After this battle, Kiev was in ruins, but Manstein's reputation reached new heights, and on the occasion of that year's falling leaves, Kiev under the flames of war became an immortal monument to the master tactician. That same year, military giant Manstein fought a pivotal battle on the Crimean Peninsula. As in Kiev, Manstein used the tactic of encirclement in the Crimean campaign. His goal was to cut off the Soviet supply lines in the Crimea and put them in an impossible position. However, compared to the Battle of Kiev, the opponents in this battle were more powerful, so he also showed his military wisdom by planning a sneak attack to disrupt the Soviet defense line. At the beginning of the campaign, Manstein first caught the Soviets off guard through a series of circuitous tactics. In addition, he further suppressed the Soviets through the use of new types of weapons and troops. Then, at the right moment, he orchestrated a fierce onslaught that completely disrupted the Soviets. There was clearly no lack of Manstein's unique insight and fearless courage behind this victory. However, even so, the Crimean campaign was one of the battles that cost the Germans dearly. The battle made Manstein realize even more the strength of the Soviet fighting force. In 1942, the eyes of the world were on Sevastopol, where the smoke was rising again. Manstein assumed command of the battle, another mark on his military career. The siege of Sevastopol was the final stage in the Crimean campaign, with the German 11th Army under Manstein laying siege to the city, which was virtually shrouded in fortified defenses. His goal was to eliminate the last bastion of the Soviet Black Sea Fleet in order to secure the German defenses in the south. Manstein's plan of action was described as calm and three-dimensional, drawing on siege tactics from Roman times, using artillery fire to clear the defenses while blocking the sea route to thwart Sevastopol's supply lines. Despite the desperate counterattacks of the Soviet army, they were ultimately unable to stop the German offensive under Manstein's calm planning and rigorous tactics. The campaign lasted 8 months and involved numerous fierce battles, and in the summer of 1942, Sevastopol was finally fully occupied by the Germans. Below, we talk about Hitler's relationship with Manstein. The relationship between Hitler and Manstein was an intricate drama that lasted throughout Hitler's leadership of Germany. Their relationship, from the initial mutual admiration, to the later clash of ideas, to the final public disagreement, is a dramatic chapter in history. At the beginning of the war, the relationship between Manstein and Hitler could be described as close. Hitler admired Manstein's military prowess, while Manstein followed Hitler's determination and leadership. Together they planned and executed many battles that continued to push the German army to victory in the war. However, as the war deepened, cracks began to appear in their relationship. Manstein was a professional military man who was truly aware of the brutality of war and the consequences of a massive offensive. With Hitler's successive offensives against the Soviet Union, Manstein began to question the rationality of his decisions. He understood that a hasty offensive would only deplete the German forces faster and cost more. This view of the war caused him to disagree sharply with Hitler on military strategy. Manstein was strongly opposed to Hitler's endless attacks on the Soviet Union. He strongly expressed his views on protracted warfare, advocating slowly weakening the enemy by depleting their strength and winning with minimal losses. However, Hitler did not take his views on board, which led to Manstein's deep disappointment with Hitler. His opposition did not bring advantages to his military career. Instead, Hitler began to doubt him, cold-shouldered him, and even stripped him of his military power in the end. However, Manstein did not let this deter him and remained true to his beliefs, examining the war with a rational eye and becoming a unique presence in German history. Manstein's relationship with Hitler became an indispensable page in World War II. Their conflicts and contradictions mapped out the clash of two theories on approaches to war during World War II, which had a profound impact on the study of World War II. After the war ended, Manstein entered a new phase in his life. The end of the war did not bring him serenity. Instead, it plunged him into a more chaotic and difficult situation. His past glory and valor did not help him escape the whirlwind of post-war liquidation. For the first time after the war, Manstein faced the most difficult challenge of his life. He was arrested and sent to the court in Nuremberg. At the tribunal, he was subjected to a harsh interrogation in which his role and behavior during the war were dissected and scrutinized in detail. Manstein was indicted on suspicion of war crimes and crimes against humanity. However, he was temporarily released in 1946 on the grounds of his deteriorating health, after which he was re-arrested and imprisoned by the British Army. Throughout his trial, Manstein insisted that he was a full-time soldier who was merely carrying out orders, which brought his conviction to a standstill. In 1952, Manstein became seriously ill and died in a hospital in Hamburg while in detention at the age of 85. Although Manstein died without a trial due to his illness, his post-war alleged involvement in Nazi Germany's war crimes has made his place in military history controversial. Considered an accomplice to war crimes, but also evaluated by some as the preeminent tactician of World War II, the controversy has persisted to the point that he is remembered by history as a complex and contradictory character. 2. Admiral Heinz Guderian. The story of Admiral Heinz Guderian began in the place that brought him the first meaning of life, a small town in Germany. This picture-perfect place, with its spring flowers, the gentle breeze blowing across the fields, and the shimmering surface of the lake under the blue sky, was not a part of his childhood, but was imprinted on the deepest part of his soul. Guderian chose to enter the military school at the age of 14, where the strict training and discipline of education let him experience the pain of his teenage years, but also let his personality carved out an indestructible sculpture. In military courses, he learned shooting, formation, and tactics, and also experienced countless physical and mental challenges. And through it all, he developed a special interest in tanks. Guderian understood tanks far better than anyone else. He saw it not as a machine of steel to be fought, but as a perfect combination of mobility and speed, which, he believed, was the key to being able to break a stalemate and sway the battle. He took this belief and developed it into his own unique military philosophy, which became known as the Blitzkrieg. For him, the use of tanks was not a simple collision of force and power, but an interactive interpretation of wit and strategy. His Blitzkrieg tactics were soon put to the test in actual combat. In several border skirmishes, Guderian insisted on the use of tanks for rapid breakthroughs, and in just a few hours, the enemy's defenses were broken and the battlefield was quickly controlled. This move was as unexpected as lightning, and the opponent could not even react to be defeated, which is the Blitzkrieg in Guderian's mind. Before the Battle of France in 1940, Guderian was already a trusted and capable military leader in Hitler's eyes. Hitler began to notice and admire Guderian's military prowess and unique strategic vision as he observed him during military maneuvers. Hitler's interactions with Guderian were initially modest, and Guderian was appointed commander of an army infantry regiment at the age of 34, some way out of Hitler's senior officer ranks. However, over time, Guderian's talents gradually gained Hitler's attention. In 1935, Hitler began to modernize the German army, which included the construction of armored units, of which Guderian was a part at that time. Guderian was very supportive of Hitler's decision and took an active part in it. In 1938, Guderian was appointed commander of the 16th German Panzer Division, proving Hitler's considerable trust in him. Thereafter, Guderian's military prowess and his belief in the concept of Blitzkrieg led Hitler to have high expectations of him. Hitler began to give him a wider and more critical role. In 1940, World War II had entered a period of intense fighting. The German 19th Panzer Army under Guderian was assembled, and their objective was the famous Maginot Line, the French fortifications that snaked like a dragon deep in the heart of the continent. On May 10th, artillery fire instantly ignited calm in France, and Guderian's Panzer Group launched its operations in the Ardennes Forest. He skillfully chose the Ardennes Forest, a strip of land that the French found difficult to pass through, in order to gain the advantage of attacking the enemy. Then, on May 13th, Guderian's army passed through the Mézières River at the city of Sedan, a spot the French had thought impassable for tanks, but Guderian managed to break through the French lines with his amazing talent and precise planning. In the next few days, his army was like a tiger descending from a mountain. On the smoke-filled battlefield, Guderian's Blitzkrieg was like a sharp sword, breaking through the French defense line, and they gave the French army a heavy blow by suppressing their firepower and strategically laying out their formations. On May 20th, Guderian's troops had reached the English Channel, and the northern part of the French army was successfully cut and encircled. On June 14th, the Germans invaded Paris, and a few days later France formally surrendered to Germany. With this news, Guderian's name resounded like cannon fire throughout Europe. The victory of the Battle of France marked the success of Guderian's Blitzkrieg tactics, and his name went down in history, and he was promoted to the rank of general. In the summer of 1943, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union fought a huge tank battle near Kursk, which was recognized as the largest tank battle in history. German forces under the command of Heinz Guderian suffered a crushing defeat in this battle. In fact, the planning of the Battle of Kursk was controversial from the beginning. Guderian himself was opposed to a large-scale offensive, believing that holding on to existing positions was the correct strategy. However, this view of his was not shared by Hitler. Hitler firmly believed that only through offense could the war situation be changed. In addition, the senior officers had a completely opposite military view to Guderian's, and they believed that the German army should take advantage of the new tanks and armored forces to break the Soviet defenses. Under pressure, Guderian was forced to undertake this offensive. However, in terms of the plan of action, he still insisted on his own strategic concepts. He devised a tactic called Operation Zenitnikov, in which he planned a simultaneous attack from the north and south of Kursk, using the Northern Corps commanded by Field Marshal von Manstein and the Southern Army Group under him, to encircle and destroy the Soviet main body. However, the planning of this attack took too long, giving the Soviets ample time to prepare. When the attack was finally launched, Guderian found himself confronted with a much stronger line of defense than had been anticipated. Under the Soviet system of defense in depth, German tanks, while certainly powerful, struggled to pose a substantial threat to the Soviets. To make matters worse, Guderian's Army Group South was under pressure from the Soviets' strong counterattacks during the battle, and they were losing tanks while their positions were shrinking more and more. Despite Guderian's attempts to adjust his tactics, Hitler's intervention prevented him from dispatching his troops flexibly. By July 13th, his tank units had suffered heavy losses, including a large number of Tiger tanks, which symbolized the German war effort. In the end, the Battle of Kursk ended in a strategic defeat for the Germans. Guderian's forces were unable to break through the Soviet lines, while the Soviets took advantage of their victory and counterattacked in force, capturing large quantities of German equipment and personnel. Guderian's defeat meant that the Third Reich could not change its strategic position on the Eastern Front. The defeat had a huge impact on the German army, as well as on Guderian himself, and marked the turning point of World War II. Here's a bit about how Hitler rated Guderian. Hitler's evaluation of Guderian was complex and contradictory. In the beginning, Hitler extremely appreciated Guderian's military talents, especially his innovative tactics in the Battle of France, which greatly improved the combat effectiveness of the German army. He regarded Guderian as a hero of the German army and a trusted friend and ally. However, as the war progressed, the relationship between the two men became strained. Guderian's conservative strategy clashed with Hitler's aggressive attitude, especially in the Ardennes counterattack, where Guderian advocated defense and Hitler insisted on offense. Guderian's stance caused Hitler to begin to doubt his loyalty and ability. The plot to assassinate Hitler in 1944 caused a complete breakdown in their relationship. Although Guderian was not involved in the attempted assassination, Hitler still questioned him as part of the plot and forced him to resign before the end of the war. After the war ended, Guderian, the general who had swept through the battlefield like a storm, returned to mediocrity. Guderian was not severely punished. He was detained by British forces in 1945 and appeared as a witness at the Nuremberg trials in 1946. Despite his power and position during the war, he was not directly involved in committing war crimes against humanity, so he was not tried as a war criminal. While in detention, Guderian wrote 3 books, Reflections and Reflections, Combat Training, and Memoirs. These books documented his military career, including his views on the war and his relationship with Hitler. In 1953, Guderian was released. He returned to Germany and lived a retired life in Hanover. He did not become politically active again, and in several interviews, he expressed regret for the mistakes of the Nazi period. Guderian died at his home in 1976 at the age of 86. 3. Field Marshal Walter Model. In the history of World War II, there is a general who shines a unique light with his excellent defense techniques and unyielding fighting spirit. He is known as the Bulwark of the East, Walter Model. General Model was one of Nazi Germany's outstanding tacticians, especially in defensive operations. He is absolutely first class. His unique leadership, tactical insight, and rock-solid defenses earned him the nickname, the Bulwark of the East. This name not only came from his many successful defensive battles on the Eastern Front in Europe, but also reflected his determination and strong will in the face of absolute weakness and adversity. This article will detail the life of Walter Model and why he is known as the best general at defense. On January 24, 1901, a new life was born in the town of Karim, Germany. This new life was Walter Model, who would win the attention of the world in the years to come with his exceptional military prowess and resilient personality. His father was a music teacher and his mother a devout housewife, and it was in this musical and bookish household that Model spent his childhood. In 1909, at the age of 18, Model chose the love of his heart and stepped into the military academy. This decision took him on a path that would become known as the Barrier of the East. During his time at the military academy, he not only increased his knowledge of military theory and strategy, but also excelled in sports, music, and crafts. This was the beginning of Model's outstanding personality, always striving to do his best, whether it was in a sunny stadium, a moonlit night of music, or a steel-hardened military career. After graduating from military school and joining the German army with honors, Model was already an experienced tactician when the Second World War began in 1939. His intelligence and deep military understanding led him to be highly decorated in the early years of the war. However, that was not all, as Model stood out for his defensive skills in the early years of the war. When the Battle of France broke out, Model was in a minefield. The fortress, which the French saw as a line of defense, was seen as a challenge or an opportunity. Under his command, his troops defied the enemy and fought one defensive battle after another against the French with a solid defensive philosophy. His tight, solid defense was an impregnable barrier to the encroaching French. Moder was a firm believer that defense was not just resisting an attack, but rather neutralizing and exhausting the enemy. Under his command, the soldiers, like hunters in a roundup, skillfully utilized the terrain and moved stealthily, leaving the enemy in a daze, unable to find their position. And when the enemy was tired, his troops would quickly counterattack like a jaguar in order to capture the greatest battle results. He shaped passivity into initiative, defense into attack, and played the enemy in the palm of his hand, which can be said to be the art of defense that is unique in the military world. When Model was sent to the Eastern Front in 1943, he had before him a battlefield that was already exhausted and loss-ridden. He was facing the mighty Soviet Red Army, but he may have been under even more pressure from the man behind him who ordered him to turn the tide and stabilize the line. However, the general known as the artist of defense, but his actions let the world witness what the real Eastern barrier. He sat in his chariot, looking out over the battle line, his mind filled with strategy and tactics. He took into account information from all sides, intelligence, terrain, weather, and other factors, and based on this, laid a solid and stable defense network. Despite facing a severe shortage of manpower and supplies, under his leadership, the German generals were like a brand new army. The position they took, like an impregnable fortress, perfectly demonstrated Moder's art of defense. Model's troops were based on defense and adopted flexible and mobile tactics to seize the enemy's weaknesses for precise counterattacks. He emphasized the use of terrain to get the enemy lost in hills, forests, and cities. He allowed enemy offensives to repeatedly shatter on his defenses, leaving the Red Army, who had high hopes for them, to constantly adjust their tactics in an attempt to find a way to crack them. However, they eventually, without exception, in front of Model's seemingly iron wall defense defeated. Model's defense tactics can be said to be the concentration of his military talent. His defense strategy was different. He did not simply stop the enemy from invading, but regarded defense as an art. He even made full use of defense to achieve counterattack and fight against the enemy. First of all, there is no doubt that Moder valued the stability of the battle line. He knew that a solid defense line could not only effectively stop the invasion of the enemy, but also provide a place for the soldiers to live. He often went to the front line to personally check the layout of the positions and the difficulty of the terrain to ensure the tightness of the defense line. His meticulous attention to detail enabled his defenses to hold at the height of the enemy's attack. However, Model's defense strategy did not stop there. He used a unique tactic, which he called living defense. The word live here means that the defense was not just a passive waiting game, but an active attitude and means to pose a threat to the enemy. He was good at using the terrain, the full launch of flexible counterattacks, so that the enemy in his laying of the line of defense, such as rats rolling in the cage, not only cannot effectively break his line of defense, but also cannot help but to pay attention to and prepare for his counterattacks may be launched. What is more admirable is that Moder's defense tactics, using a large number of psychological tactics. In his eyes, war was not just a simple physical fight, but a complex human athleticism. He knew how to be calm and collected, so that the enemy could ride the tiger. He knew how to change unpredictably, so that the enemy would be exhausted. His precise calculations and rich experience in war made him behind the lines of defense, like a musician pulling the strings, so that every note could roar in the ears of the enemy. Like all great strategists, Model had suffered failures and setbacks. War is cruel and unforgiving, and a single victory cannot hide the shadow of defeat forever, especially in those disaster-filled times. However, the greatest failure is not to lose ground in war, but to lose faith and courage in the face of setbacks. As for Model, he turned the setbacks in his life into a jackhammer with his strong will and overwhelming perseverance, forging his proud military career. It was the winter of 1944, and the Soviet Red Army's offensive was fierce as fire. Model was adamantly opposed to retreat, but his troops were still being rushed to pieces, and the defense line was breached by the enemy. Faced with immediate defeat, Model was under unprecedented pressure. However, he was determined not to give up. He drew on past experience, summarized his previous defensive strategies, and made adjustments to the shortcomings of his own defense strategy. He used the terrain more delicately, set up firepower networks more accurately, and allocated manpower and material resources more efficiently. He became more and more courageous, and his troops regained the courage to fight. His defenses became more solid and more impenetrable after one adjustment after another. His tactics were tested again and again to perfection. Walter Moder was promoted to Field Marshal by Adolf Hitler in July 1944 in the drive for the Normandy Line. The relationship between Field Marshal Walter Model and Adolf Hitler underwent many transformations during World War II. Their relationship was primarily based on the relationship between a soldier and his top officer, but as the war progressed, this relationship changed. In the beginning, Model was Hitler's right-hand man. Hitler admired Model's military prowess as well as his loyalty and dedication, so he promoted Model early in the war and gave him the important position of commanding the army. Hitler often listened to Moder's advice and would often follow it. However, as the war progressed, especially on the Soviet Union's Eastern Front, the situation in Nazi Germany began to deteriorate. During this time, a rift began to appear in the relationship between Moder and Hitler. Model began to question some of Hitler's decisions and made several attempts to convince Hitler to change his strategy and tactics. However, Hitler was very adamant about his decisions and took offense to Model's opposition. Despite the rift in their relationship, Model remained loyal to Hitler and continued to carry out his orders. However, as the war progressed, especially after the Normandy landings in 1944, the relationship between Moder and Hitler deteriorated further. After the Normandy landings, Moder criticized Hitler's strategy and believed that his decisions led to the defeat of the German army in France. At this point, the relationship between Hitler and Moder became very tense. Despite this, Model was appointed Field Marshal by Hitler and commanded some of the key battles fought in France and Germany. Until the end of the war, despite the fact that the relationship between Hitler and Moder became increasingly strained, they still maintained a complex alliance. Despite Moder's objections to some of Hitler's decisions, he still did his best to carry out his orders and fought hard for Germany on the battlefield. On the other hand, despite his displeasure with Moder's skepticism, Hitler still considered Moder to be one of the generals he could trust the most. In 1945, just as the war was drawing to a close, news came that shocked the entire world. Field Marshal Walter Moder passed away. His passing, like a cold wine through the smoke of war, rushed into the hearts of countless soldiers and civilians. His career, like an eagle spreading its wings and flying high, but eventually fell suddenly under the blue sky. Model's death was a great blow to the soldiers on the defense line. They had lost their commander and their spiritual support. Like a flock of lost sheep, they were almost at a loss for words in the midst of the fierce battle. Both the soldiers and the senior officers felt a deep weight of grief. They had fought for many years in Walter Moder's army and had deep admiration and affection for the highly placed marshal. For them, his death was tantamount to the fall of the heavens. As for the direction of the war, Model's death undoubtedly accelerated the end of the war. Moder's superb defensive tactics were undoubtedly the main driving force behind the German army's aggressive defense. His death meant that the German army lost a great strategist, his army lost its leader, and the defense became weak and vulnerable, which eventually led to the total defeat of the German army. 4. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring. Albert Kesselring was a German field marshal during World War II and one of the most important military leaders of Nazi Germany. He has been hailed by comrades and historians as the Lion of Berlin for his determined defense during World War II, especially in Berlin and its environs during the latter part of the war, as well as his tenacious command of the battlefields of Italy. Although Berlin's military power was already depleted at the end of the war, Kesselring slowed down the fall of the city through his wise and courageous command and gave the city's soldiers and civilians hope for resistance. His perseverance and determination inspired the Berliners to resist, which is why he was called the Lion of Berlin. Albert Kesselring was born on November 30th, 1885, to a poor craftsman's family in Markgrafenstadt, Germany. His parents made a living mending shoes. Their home was on a narrow street, with houses close to each other, windows facing the gloomy street all year round, and the only sunlight was a few beams of light coming down from the dust-covered skylight. Kesselring's childhood was a difficult one, and it required a great deal of effort on the part of his parents to keep him and his 4 siblings alive. Despite the hardships, living in an environment shrouded in long hours of labor and hard work undoubtedly led Kesselring to develop a hard-hearted and resilient character, which laid the foundation for his later military career. In 1904, at the age of 18, Kesselring entered the German army and quickly rose to prominence. He was serving as an officer in an artillery regiment when World War I broke out. His outstanding performance on the battlefield earned him a promotion from a general officer to colonel. After the war, he continued to serve in the downsized German army. By the time World War II broke out in 1939, Albert Kesselring had become an important officer in the Luftwaffe. His military acumen, tenacity, and his deep understanding of tactics quickly made him Heinrich von Brecht's right-hand man. Kesselring's abilities were fully utilized, and he began his military career with Brecht's appreciation. During the Polish and French campaigns of 1939 to 1940, he brought the German air artillery forces to bear on the battlefield through brilliant military planning. Kesselring's talent and courage were recognized during this period when he was promoted to Air Marshal. Although Kesselring's initial military successes depended on his air artillery, his military prowess did not stop there. He had an in-depth knowledge of the overall situation of the war, and his interdisciplinary expertise led to his appointment as commander of Malaysia in 1941. Where he was responsible for commanding German forces in Southeast Asia. His command demonstrated superb military skills and succeeded in reducing the British offensive and in driving them out of Malaysia in early 1942. In the spring of 1945, Berlin, the capital of Germany, was at the center of the world's attention. Albert Kesselring, a veteran who had served as chief of staff of the German army since 1942, was faced with a daunting task. He was assigned as the commander of Berlin's defense, charged with guarding the city in the face of an unparalleled and tragic war situation. By the time Kesselring took over as commander of Berlin's defense, the city had endured weeks of continuous shelling, the people were pessimistic, and the German army was demoralized. His primary deployment was to do everything in his power to minimize casualties in the city and protect the lives of soldiers and civilians. He led a defense force with a crippled formation that included the old, the sick, the young, and children, as well as a number of soldiers who had been wounded or demoralized from the front. Berlin was in desperate straits, with almost nothing but endless ruins and dilapidation. Nevertheless, Kesselring did his best to hold out in the face of adversity, keeping the lines as stable as possible and through skillful tactics and strict discipline, allowing what remained of his forces to last as long as they could in the Battle of the Siege. He personally commanded and organized the resistance, even manually correcting the distribution of the lines on the map to make the defense more efficient. Tactically, Kesselring understood that the ground was not in my favor, so he abandoned large-scale counterattacks in favor of smaller, but more frequent sneak attacks. He used city buildings as bunkers to launch fewer but more impactful counterattacks. Kesselring's tactics kept the Red Army in a constant state of fear and had to be constantly on the lookout for potential danger. Kesselring understood that the spirit of the soldiers was paramount in these troubled days. Therefore, he was not only their commander, but also their inspirer. He motivated each soldier to persevere with a strong belief. He made them realize that they were fighting for their families and for their country. Under Kesselring's careful planning and command, the defensive battle for Berlin lasted longer than had been expected. His courage, intelligence, and perseverance were fully realized during the war, and his name, as a result, went down in history. However, Kesselring's efforts could not turn the tide of the war. It was on April 23 that the Soviet Red Army attacked simultaneously from the north and south, completely encircling Berlin. Facing the Soviet Union's several times their own strength, with no air support, food and ammunition shortages, the German defense line began to crumble a little. The battle raged for several days, with Kesselring's troops resisting stubbornly, but it was difficult to stop the Soviets from closing in. On May 2nd, in the center of Berlin, the last line of defense, including the Field Marshal's building, was breached by the Soviets, and Kesselring realized that continued resistance would not help, but would only increase the number of unnecessary sacrifices. He first tried to negotiate with the Soviets, but the Red Army was not willing to accept. In the spring of 1945, the streets of Berlin smelled of war and dust, and the rubble and debris in the streets were a testament to the city's former glory and current decay. Albert Kesselring stood on the geometrically shaped stone in front of the combat command and looked out over the burning city. He knew that this was the result of the war, that this once prosperous metropolis was about to fall completely. After the last failed counterattack, Kesselring disposed of all the tasks at hand, straightened every insignia on his uniform, and waved goodbye to his soldiers. He then left through a hidden exit that led underground, taking his second-in-command and a messenger with him, and that was the final order. They marched through the ground and the hidden tunnels towards the Soviet positions. Albert Kesselring was captured by the Soviet Red Army at the end of World War II and subsequently extradited to Allied-controlled Germany. He was tried at the Nuremberg Military Tribunal on charges of committing war crimes in the Netherlands and Belgium. During the trial, Kesselring vehemently denied all charges and insisted that he was only loyal to his duty and to his country. The court, after looking at the testimonies and evidence of a large number of witnesses, finally convicted Kesselring of war crimes and crimes against humanity in 1947 and sentenced him to life imprisonment. Albert Kesselring spent 4 years in prison, and in 1951, he was transferred to a military prison in Wiltshire, England. During his imprisonment, however, he kept his morale high and wrote from his cell, leaving behind many memoirs of his time serving in the German army. Eventually, while serving his prison sentence, Kesselring suffered a severe heart attack in 1953. Although medical assistance was immediately available, recovery was hopeless for the 74-year-old. On December 24th of that year, Albert Kesselring died of a heart attack in prison in England. That's it for this installment. Thanks for watching.